now, let me introduce our speaker, Jack Cumming. Jack is going to give us, well, I won't tell you what he's going to do, but I just want to welcome him, thank him for coming, and the microphone is all yours, Jack.
See if this one's on. Well, thank you very much, Barbara, and Shirley. I don't know that I can measure up to the predecessors that I've had, but I think I've got some material here to talk about. And first I want to thank Barbara for asking me to come up here. It's really a pleasure to come here. I've been to Sacramento. This is now my third trip this year to Sacramento in one way or another. We're so fortunate. You have a really wonderful facility here. I went out this morning. We have a special program at Carlsbad by the Sea, where I live, that's started by the University of California, San Diego, to try to encourage us to do more walking. So they give us all a pedometer, and we record every day how much walking we do. And it's amazing how just having that record of how you're doing gets you up and going. And they found that with all the wonderful things about CCRC living, the one downside was that people became more sedentary, particularly if you live in the apartment that's right next to the dining room. So you kind of roll out of bed and into the dining room and then roll back into your recliner, and that's about it. So the average person was doing about 1,100 steps a day in that mode. And there are, believe it or not, there are federal guidelines. Somebody in the wise soul in the federal government who knows about such things. And oh, is that too loud? No. Okay. Is that better, sir? All right. We can tell we're in the CCRC. Louder, softer, warmer, colder. So that's sort of the way it goes. So the federal government has these guidelines. 7,000 steps a day. The typical CCRC resident gets about 1,100. 7,000 steps a day, and you begin to strengthen the immune system so that you have greater resistance to whatever may come your way. 10,000 steps a day, and I can assure you that there are almost nobody who reaches that level. At 10,000 steps a day, it begins to help to counter obesity and diabetes, or as one wise soul calls it, diabetes. But this is all by way of saying, aren't we fortunate to live in a CCRC? And aren't we fortunate for the vision that has given us this choice for living in retirement and coming together in the social life and all of it? I mean, how many of you agree with that? Okay. That's wonderful. Now, I suggest that you hold your questions until I complete the overview. There's a lot of material to cover. You may, and then we'll have a conversation. I hope we can have a conversation. Today's topic is membership. And this is a little bit about like Stewardship Sunday at church. And I was always surprised. I've only been asked to preach in church a few times. Usually the pastor, he likes to get up there every week and speak, and they don't usually allow questions. But anyway, come Stewardship Sundays, often they'll let somebody speak, and when I've been on the vestry, they'll say, well, would you speak for Stewardship Sunday? So I'll give you my stewardship sermon first, and then we'll get into the membership part. And the stewardship sermon goes like this. We owe everything to God, to give everything you have to the church, and then you can go on the assistance program that they have here, and they'll take care of you for the rest of your life. That's my stewardship. You owe it all to God, so just send it in. Let me start with some questions of my own, though, just to set the stage. How many of you know what Calcra is? Okay, how many of you are Calcra members? So virtually the same group. And I imagine that the people that this membership talk is intended to reach may not be here. How many of you know what the National Continuing Care Residents Association is? We've got about 4 people. How many, that's called NACRA, HELCRA and NACRA. How many of you are NACRA members? Nobody. Nobody is a NACRA member. How many of you know what Aging Services of California is? Okay, Aging Services is a provider organization. How many of you are members of Aging Services of California?
All of us. All of us.
Trick question.
Yeah, that was a trick question.
How many of you know what a Type A contract is? Just a few people. How many of you have a Type A contract? A full care. A Type A contract is a full care contract. How many of you have a full care contract? You have a full care contract?
I think so.
Okay, that's wonderful. So if you have to go to the skilled nursing center, you don't pay any extra.
Oh, no.
Okay. Since CALCRA arranged this, let's start with CALCRA membership. And I did a little research to prepare this. I feel a little intimidated because Walt Rosette's here and he could give this talk just, but I'll do it and then maybe Walt will correct anything I leave out during the break. And Barbara as well. Barbara's been instrumental in CALCRA. CALCRA's basic purpose, this is from their website, is to enhance the quality of life and financial security of CCRC residents. CALCRA has responded to this challenge by aiming to create a climate of cooperation between management and residents. This goal can only be achieved through trust. In order to establish trust, providers must have an open relationship with their residents. This includes considering mutual concerns and suggestions respectfully with an open mind and providing full disclosure of all financial and non-financial data. And I'm very hopeful about this because, you know, I'm an actuary and I'm interested in this kind of thing. And somebody told me this morning, I guess it was Carl, that Jane Ipsen, the executive director's son, is an actuary. So I'm sure that there's an understanding of the actuarial involvement in these things. Now, CALCRA has pursued these goals. And I think we'd all agree those. Do you all agree with that statement? Does that seem like a positive program to foster trust and cooperation between management and residents? CALCRA has pursued that through legislation. And it has a remarkable list of legislative achievements to its credit. All right. But anyway, from that, you can see that CALCRA has been very successful in getting legislation through in California. It has a long track record of working closely with the legislature, excuse me, senior moment. And CALCRA works in close affiliation with other organizations. There's the consumer advocacy attorneys and the California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform. And I'm pleased to say that Walt Rosette and Margaret Griffin and Barbara Krings, they all work in close harmony with these other groups. So you're wise to be in CALCRA. Now, if there's CALCRA, why is there NACRA? And for those of you who may not remember, NACRA is the National Continuing Care Residents Association. CALCRA is California focused, but some issues are nationwide. Also, there are multi-state provider organizations. So a multi-state provider organization might take profits from one community and move them out of state to another state where there's less regulation, so they can have more flexibility in using those funds, which are derived, of course, from residents. There's federal legislation, like the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act of 2010. Are you all familiar with that? Some people derogatorily call it Obamacare, but it's the new national health care law. How many of you are uneasy about how the new national health care law may affect you? Okay. That's a question. I'm a fairly smart guy and an actuary and worked in insurance, et cetera, and I'm not quite sure. It just doesn't feel quite right. Also, the income tax is more federal than at the state level. And one of the things that NACRA achieved, do you remember the old imputed income tax, that if you had a refundable contract, you were imputed interest on that entrance fee and you had to declare it and pay income tax on it every year? That was something. NACRA worked to get that removed, and that's no longer the case. Also, Medicare and Medicaid are federal programs, and they affect certain people in these, well, a lot of people for the Medicare needs, and stewardship for their use. I'm sure you know that the residents at Covenant at South Hills in Pennsylvania lost their entire entrance fee investment in the community. It was gone. Second, we've been working to get accounting integrity. The CCRC industry now has special accounting rules. They're not the same as the rules for any other industry. So a similar transaction, the consistency principle of accounting principles would hold that a transaction in one industry would be treated the same in another. The CCRC industry has its own accounting rules. And those rules move the earnings to the early years so that there's a shortfall in the later years when more care is likely to be required. We at NACRA are trying to address that challenge, and that is a challenge. We're also addressing the questions of equity between cohorts of residents. That would be, for example, let's say you're in a large apartment and your spouse dies and you elect to transfer to a smaller apartment. That ought to be handled in a fair and equitable financial way. Now, many providers do not handle it in a totally equitable fashion. Well, I see, okay, so you understand what I'm talking about. We're working on that. And the fourth thing that we were working on was contractual integrity, so that contracts can be readily understood as an instrument for fulfillment of commitments rather than just as a document crafted to allow providers to defend themselves against recalcitrant residents. I don't know how many of you fully understand your contracts, but I know my contract is a wonder. But I wanted to live there. As Barbara pointed out to me this morning, I signed that darn thing. They may have tricked me. They gave me a different contract to review than the one they gave me to sign. I thought that was a little tricky. But nevertheless, okay, I signed it. So NACRA's trying to do this by trying to shift the provider mentality from doing things for residents to doing them with residents. And we have many prongs in this effort. First, we have a booth at industry meetings. When the Leading Age, which is the provider organization nationwide, meets, NACRA has a booth there where providers can come and we try to educate them. We provide panel presentations at industry conferences. This began a year or so ago. Walt was there at the Leading Age meeting in Los Angeles, and I think that was the first. A.V. Powell and I will be having a panel presentation at the Aging Services of California meeting in Palm Springs on May 7th. And we will have a fully NACRA panel at the Denver meeting of Leading Age in October. So that's another forum where we can begin to educate providers, and it's beginning to have an effect. It's surprisingly. We're developing concepts for best practices. We're producing consumer guides. A fellow named Al LeBlanc from Colorado is active in that. And we've begun a program which led to a lot of discussion over breakfast this morning to draft model laws, model regulations, and model enforcement protocols. We've been publishing articles, and we've sought to advance intellectual engagement through our NACRA University, or our Residence Learning Center, at www.naccrau.com. And that is beginning to also have an impact. I got some feedback on that. Now, we just met over the weekend in Virginia at the Westminster Community in Lake Ridge. It's amazing how similar these places are. You know, you go to one, you wouldn't get lost at Westminster Lake Ridge. You'd know your way to find the dining room and everything else. It's pretty much the same layout. I think they may all use Perkins Eastman to do their planning, and it just comes out about the same. But anyway, we went through a strategic thinking effort led by Billy Alban, who, oh, I forgot your name now. Chuck, okay, Chuck is familiar with Billy Alban. She's done a lot of work with churches. And I was surprised at some of the outcome. These were the top concerns among residents that emerged from that. And remember, we had security of the residents' investment #1. They placed #1 was the shift of risk from providers to residents, the move from type A contracts to type C. That's bothering residents. They move in and they come to realize that they have a type C contract, which means a fee-for-service contract, and suddenly they're afraid they may run out of money. And they didn't fully understand that when they moved in. That turned out to be the #1 concern. The second thing they had was transparency, the wish to have resident representation on boards. They're worried about increasing operating costs, leading to increasing monthly fees. I think that's probably everywhere. They're worried about the increase in the number of fees for service. I think that one was sort of parallel with the first one, but it came out as a separate item, so I've kept it separate. They're very worried about the prospect of higher healthcare costs with the new healthcare law, that may drive healthcare costs higher, and that residents on fixed incomes may not have the wherewithal to pay it. They're concerned about the lowering of entry standards. Seems like people are being admitted, and you think, well, gee, I wonder why they're not in the nursing facility. Why are they in an independent living unit? That was a concern. The challenge of occupancy in a down real estate market. And lastly, there was one, they talked about the fact that some of the newer prospects are better educated, more informed. They want to ask more questions before deciding to move in. And so we turned that around to that we have a need to provide resources to educate prospective residents so that they can make better choices. So that's what we're doing. Now, why isn't CalCRA affiliated with NACRA? And there's a story there. And I'll give my version. Walt may have his version. Barbara said she's got part of it. So, over here, okay. We're over there. But the first is the belief that NACRA is provider friendly. And that's true. I've been told, as recently as in an email this morning, from, actually it was a phone message, but it got converted to an email from somebody you may know, Lily Hyatt. I've been told that we are just stooges for the administration. So maybe we are. But as we see it, the providers hold the cards. And we need to understand the providers if we want to change their mentality. So just railing against them or being what the Germans call a Besserwisser. I don't know, we have a word for that in English. Let's see. That's somebody who knows better than somebody else. So a lot of residents think they know better than the providers, and that's not always welcome advice. So that's true. We try to understand the providers, and to that end, I recently qualified. I went through their educational program, the providers program, and I'm now a certified aging services professional. Wow. But anyway, then there's a belief, this is another, now these are reasons why COPPA might not affiliate with NACRA. A belief that CCRC regulation is at the state level. And that also is true. But it overlooks the possibility for uniform model laws, model regulations, and model enforcement protocols. And that's something we can work on. And finally, there's a belief that NACRA has not been effective. And that's probably true. The primary accomplishment has been the imputed interest in the right to return home initiatives, but we need more national engagement. Now, what has been the effect of COPPA's disaffiliation with NACRA? And that brings us to Aging Services of California. And you remember when I asked how many of you are members of Aging Services of California, I think there were about 3 or 4 hands, and some people understood the answer. Because when COPPA decided to disaffiliate from Aging Services of California, Ann Burns Johnson, who was then the CEO of Aging Services, said, this is an opportunity to minus out COPPA. We'll change our bylaws to hold that all residents living in a member community are ipso facto members of Aging Services of California. So you're all members of Aging Services of California. That allowed them then to go and whisper in the ears of legislative staff people, the people who make the decisions. Well, we speak for 20,000 CCRC residents in California, and COPPA speaks for about 10% of their number, about 2,000. So you should listen to us. Where does this leave us? Well, CalCRA needs you. Most of you, you're preaching to the choir here. It's like Stewardship Sunday when you're preaching to the people who come to church, even on Stewardship Sunday. So, but CalCRA needs you. NACRA needs you, and I hope you'll look into our NACRA University and see if you think that's valuable before you decide if you want to send in a membership check for NACRA. Aging Services has got you. They've got you. So join us to make sure that your voice is heard and your future is secure. Now that's my membership pitch. And we can just take questions, or if you prefer, I'm going to talk about the continuing care at home or the issue of nonprofit versus for-profit organization. So just to throw out some ideas. So don't feel that you have to step up with questions. But if you have questions, I'll take them. And I also want to be sure that Walt has a chance to correct what I might have said about CalCRA.
Jack, I've heard rumors that there are more type A on this paper that you gave us, or life care as I knew it, more type A facilities coming into practice. I would assume that more type C would be the advantageous thing for profit type stuff, or at least for making money.
The industry trend is clearly away from the full care type A contract toward the full fee-for-service, sometimes at a mild discount, type C contract. And because many prospective residents don't grasp that can go 2 ways. A responsible provider deciding that they wanted to shift that risk to the resident would lower the pricing to reflect the greater risk that the residents then would have to carry. An irresponsible provider can keep the same pricing and just use the difference to be able to pay market-based compensation to staff members.
Let me comment on NACRA versus CalGRA. One of the fundamental problems that NACRA has is budget. It has about a third of the money that CalGRA has. Well, if you're trying to operate at the national level, particularly if you were to think about doing any lobbying, it's virtually impossible on the NACRA budget. We would like NACRA to be effective, and we think the most effective way for them to really pursue their efforts is to take what is being done on the statewide level and communicate that to the others. There's some very good work being done throughout the country. Orange, which is the operation in New Jersey, has done just a great job putting together a financial study. And I'm sure that many others throughout the country can do the same thing. And Jack has, through this NACRA-U, started a communication process. So, but I wholeheartedly endorse what Jack has said so far.
But don't just jump into it. Look at the NACRA University first. And if you don't have internet access, find a friend who does, because they'll be happy to show you the stuff, and you can participate in the things jointly, and from that, then you can decide whether this is something you want to support or not. It's a purely voluntary thing. Are there any other questions?